Well, I look at sport this time with our new series, This Sport in Life, a little bit different this time. I'm trying to split it into two. It's to do and to coincide with the end of Borough Park, if you like, the final day of Borough Park's existence as a football stadium will be this afternoon. Workington Reds taking on Leek Town. After that, it's going to be demolished and a new Cumbria Sports Village in its place on the same site. So people will be still going to the same area of the town to watch the football and rugby league, of course. But Borough Park as such, because I'm sure there's going to be a new name for the ground when it's developed. So Borough Park in its old existence since 1937. So almost 90 years since football started at Borough Park. That will end this afternoon. Workington against Leek Town. So for the first part, I just want to talk about my own memories of Borough Park. And in the second part, I want to be talking to supporters who've been down there for years, for officials, and for ex-players, of course, and many of whom are attending this afternoon's game with Leek. My own memories start in 1953. I can remember going to an early, I can't exactly say who it was or what the score was, but the thing remember about the game was there was a budgerigar flying loose in the stand. It was a blue one, and it was going from end to end flying about, and I was mesmerised by it. Would the owner of Budgerigar GB489T please report to the ground? You know that that didn't happen, but could just imagine it in another time being recorded like that from the PA system. But nothing like that happened then. But it was loose in the stand. And another memory early on, couldn't tell you the date, but it was certainly against Oldham Athletic because the player manager was George Hardwick. And George Hardwick was a absolute lookalike for film star Errol Flynn, who I just seen in The Adventures of Robin Hood, still one of my favourite films. And here he was running up and down in front of me in the enclosure. It was Errol Flynn. And of course, he was well known as a man who resembled the looks of that film star. And he was the player manager at Oldham at the time. Funny enough, years later, a friend from the Times and Star, Joan Jeffrey, captain of our quiz team, spent time in the Thomas Cook Hospital. I beg your pardon, that's the holidays, that's the holiday family, the James Cook Hospital in Middlesbrough. And at the same time, George Hardwick was in being treated, and they got a lot of conversations. And in the end, George presented Joan with his autobiography. I think it was called something like Gentleman George, and that was George Hardwick, England international, and played at Borough Park very, very early days. Why I was there in 53, I remember it was 53. Let's go back to the little bit of family history. My granddad was from Accrington, born 100 yards from Peel Park. And when his father died, only aged 44, James, his mother, who was from West Cumberland, Arabella, came back home, as it were, brought Walter, that was my granddad, with her. She remarried a miner from Espatria called Hewitson. And eventually, my granddad married a Maryport girl, Jane Penrice Studholme. And my dad was born in 1918 on Curzon Street in Maryport. And they eventually attended a Workington Reds game. My granddad, who'd followed Accrington Stanley, started following Workington Reds. And in the early 30s, Workington were drawn against Preston North End in the third round of the FA Cup, one of the biggest games they'd played ever up till that point. It was on Lunsdale Park, just across behind Borough Park, and was a famous game. There was pictures taken of supporters watching the game from the top of the roof of the grandstand. A famous picture of that game. Reds lost 2-1, a notable effort against the Football League side. That was in the early 30s. 1937, of course, Borough Park opened. And in 51, after years in the North Eastern League, they were elected to the Football League. And my dad, Alan Walsh, he started going to watch them in 1951. I remember as a kid being dropped off in Workington with my mother. And we went shopping while Dad went to the match, parked his car down at Old Side. We would walk after knowing what time the finish was. We'd walk back towards the car, wait for him outside the ground. On the bridge there was a little gate at the top where you went down, and that was where the enclosure entrance was, and that's where we stood the game. Anyway, so that was the first 2 years I wasn't involved. And then in 1953, November 53, I remember coming home from school. International matches were played in the afternoon, those at Wembley in those days. And England were playing Hungary. England had never been beaten at Wembley in all the time they'd played there. And Hungary beat them 6-3. And I was sitting I know I was looking through child's eyes and things are different. But I was mesmerised. The football was absolutely brilliant. Hungary's still my favourite, apart from England, of course. Hungary's still my favourite team. Follow them, have done ever since. Ferenc Puskás still my favourite player. And it just changed the outlook as far as I was concerned. We'd played football in the schoolyard at Ellenborough with a tennis ball, but I never sort of knew anything about the game locally, as it were. There was no coaching then. There was no kids football. But after seeing the Hungarians beat England at Wembley, I wanted more of it, and so very soon after November 53, Dad started taking me to the Reds matches, and continued to do that. And the memories have started from there, really. Although the originals were about Budgerigars and Errol Flynn, after that the memories of the actual games came into play. We always stood in the enclosure, about 7 or 8, 9 yards down from the dugout, and watched the games from there. I remember there's one occasion I remember it was not so very, very pleasant. Right in front of us, where we stood, right next to the touchline, next to the enclosure, Jimmy Fleming, a fullback, broke his leg right in front of us, and the crack, you could hear. I can still hear it now. And poor old Jimmy was stricken in front of us, and I can remember him being carted off on a stretcher. And he did make a comeback after that, and pleased to say that he played for Working a bit more after that, and then went back to Scotland from where he'd come. A lot of players in those days joined Workington from Scottish clubs or from English clubs where they'd come previously, but originally from Scotland, and we've been well served by those type of players. One of my favourites was a goalkeeper, Malcolm Newlands. Could have been a Scottish international, but was a little bit fiery on the field and had his moments at Preston. I think that's why we signed him, because Preston were a little bit, shall we say, that had enough of his antics. He came to Workington and was an absolute star as a goalkeeper, a hero for Workington on many occasions. And later in life, I got to know him at Cockermouth, where he was landlord of the Black Bull. And we, as young players then with Deer Orchard, we used to go in there and have a chat with Malcolm. And he was a proper gentleman, really gentleman, completely different to what he was on the field. One famous game at Borough Park was against Chester, and Malcolm was infuriated by one of the Chester players, whatever he'd been doing or saying, and he kicked the ball against him, and it flew past him into the net, and it gave Chester victory. So Malcolm wasn't flavour of the month after that one. Jimmy Daly was another hero of mine in those days in the 3rd Division North. He just scored goals for fun. I can see him diving through a forest of legs to get in a header and score. He was that type of brave, hard-working centre forward, knew where the goals were, and he was the first player that Workington had to score over 20 goals in the Football League, and he did it a couple of times, I think. But the biggest honour I felt at that time was when I met my hero. Not when he was playing for Workington, but years later when we had a reunion in the Washington Central. They were all, well, a lot of the players were there from the league days. And Jimmy Daly came up from Weymouth. He ran a sports outfitter shop in Weymouth, and he came up for that reunion. I remember shaking hands with him and having my picture taken with him, and that was a memorable occasion. A lovely bloke, as it turned out. And that was a great moment. But there's been great moments on the field at Borough Park, and some of the games have been absolutely top notch. Manchester United 1958, a month before tragic Munich disaster. Most of those players were there on that occasion, who sadly died in the crash. Workington leading at half time. Clive Coleridge, another of my heroes, the left winger, signed from York City. We didn't have him long. We sold him cheaply to Crewe Alexandra, and then Crewe sold him for a nice profit to Manchester City, where he was a popular player, and ended his playing career at Altrincham, where he did very, very well as well. That game, 1-0 at half-time, Matt Busby coming down off the stand, looking very, very concerned. Champions of England trailing 1-0 to a team in the lower regions of Division 3 North at half-time. Second half, of course, Dennis Filer's hat-trick changed things, and United won the game 3-1 and went through. But sadly, as I said, a month after that, there was a tragedy at Munich. Another cup tie, of course. This time was in the FA Cup. Played Notts Forest in the FA Cup at Workington. Did really well. Lost 2-1. But Joe Wilson, a lad from Northside actually, who was playing fullback for us, marked the guy from a winger from Notts Forest called Dick Leflem, and did so well that Forest came back a few months later and bought him. So Joe went to Notts Forest, he went to Wolves, and eventually he came back to Workington and finished his career with the club. Quite a character. Remember when we used to go away on the team coach, Joe would bring his accordion and play and sing songs on the way back, which sounded very, very good when we'd won a game. And he was a really, really local, enthusiastic, excellent footballer. Very, very tough. I mean, there's match of the day. Remember in the days when he put Cliff Jones, a Tottenham Hotspur winger, onto the over the touchline, and there was comments in the commentary. Whoever was commentating at the time, probably Kenneth Wolstenholme, who was I bet that hurt, and it most certainly did. So Joe was a character. Notts Forest was a famous game. Then we got that were the two FA Cup ties that stand to mind, United and Forest. Then there was the League Cup runs at Borough Park. The times when we've played the likes of Coventry City, Norwich, famous Blackburn Rovers, famous of all, of course, because after we'd drawn 0-0 at Borough Park, we went to Blackburn, who had 7 or 8 internationals in the lineup, and we beat them 5-1 down there. Then a result. I mean, there was no social media then. There was no scores on telly even at that time. You had to wait for the paper in the morning to find out the score. And I remember finding out the score. And, is that a misprint? Yeah, but no, fantastic. And John Ogilvie, one of the players in that match, is coming along this afternoon, travelling down from Edinburgh to watch the game. So it'd be nice to have a crack with Oggy. So that was Blackburn. Then there was we played West Ham, but Chelsea was another famous one at Workington, 2-2, and everyone will tell you of Workington persuasion that we scored the winning goal. Jeff Martin put one in, ruled offside, and I suppose you would say you would, wouldn't you? But no, it looked a genuine case for a good goal being disallowed. Went down to Chelsea for the replay, played well again, only lost 2-0. And a certain Peter Osgood making his debut for Chelsea, he scored both goals. After that, there's been, the other memorable games at Borough Park. We come into a period then, though, which was a sad decline. We had the promotion season of 63, 64, and probably the most famous league of that time and ever was the Boxing Day derby against Carlisle United. We, as a family, used to go through to my auntie and uncle's farm, Hill House at Aldeth, near Abbeytown. We used to go through there on Boxing Day. And this time we had a lunch early, and we made the effort to get back to watch the game against Carlisle at Borough Park. But there was such a big crowd that there was queues outside. We had to wait quite a bit outside to get in. And when you knew there was something happening inside because of the cheers. When we got in, remember there was 18,600 there, and when we got in, we were 2-0 down. And Macklemore and Livingston, I think, had scored the goals. But we fought back. Jeff Martin and Dave Carr got the goals. 2-2, wonderful derby game. And one of the best, that was a record for a league match as far as the attendance was concerned. And we ended up, both of us, being promoted to Division 3. And it was in that time, just after that, then Workington had their highest ever position in the Football League. George Ainsley was manager, and he took us to fourth in the table. Now, George, everybody subsequently, he had a little bit of a drink problem, George, which ended his stay at Workington. But subsequently, people were saying that if he'd looked after himself, if he hadn't had that problem, he would have ended up where Alf Ramsey was with England, because he was so highly rated as a coach and a leader. Actually, he was very, very good. I remember Deer Orchard. We didn't have any coaching. We used to go up and just play five-a-side in the gym or outside, play full 11. We had him as a one-off coach at the Derwent School, George Ainsley, and he came up and he was unbelievable, really. I mean, we'd never seen anything, been put through anything like that, and he was outstanding. But he didn't last long, unfortunately, because of the problems he had. And then it was Brian Doyle was probably the manager. I took over writing about Reds in 1967. Dan Richardson had done it for years. Dan, who's, I'm not sure whether it was his granddad or his dad, it was also called Dan Richardson, was a former Workington chairman. And Dan was a great bloke, a lot of time for him. But he had a problem in that he liked long lunch hours, should we say, and a Guinness or two in the Cons Club and a game of snooker. And unfortunately for Dan, he did it once too often, and was asked to leave, and that was the end of him as a reporter at Workington doing the Reds matches. He'd done it for years, as I said, and that was 1967, and I inherited the job from then, and I've covered Reds various outlets ever since. But Dan did okay. He went from Workington. He joined the Stoke Sentinel, and part of his work was ghosting an article each week by Gordon Banks. And I know, talking to Dan later, that he thoroughly enjoyed that. And Gordon was a very, very nice bloke, as he said, and he got a lot of pleasure out of writing those feature articles for the Sentinel. So in 1967, I took over, and the manager that I remember most of all, and I thought was probably the best man. Well, the first manager I worked with, as it were, as a journalist, was Bill Levers. Bill Levers, former Manchester City captain, came to Workington. He was only there a few months, and left to take another job. Cambridge United, I think he went to, and won promotion there. And he was also involved with Cambridge City as well. So that didn't last long when he was there. But the best manager that I certainly worked with while we were in the Football League was Brian Doyle. Now, Doyle had, well, the sign of a good manager. He could bring in players who cost nothing, free transfers, and they would become good servants for the particular club. We're talking about the likes of Alan Tyrer, Dave Helliwell, Johnny Martin, Tommy Spencer. He turned Tommy Spencer from a centre forward into a centre half. He got John Flynn back to the club and then sold him to Sheffield United, where he had such a fine career. Brian Wood, great signing as well, who gave a lot of good service to Workington. And of course, Brian, latterly at Workington, was caretaker manager. And there was, although we didn't have the results that would have got him the job, certainly a lot of us thought the performances were worth him getting the job long term. And it was a cup tie at Darlington. We were away at Darlington in the FA Cup, and one of the supporters, had a transistor radio with him, and it was announced on the whatever programme he'd been listening to, that Workington were going to appoint Colin Meldrum as their new manager. And this was while the FA Cup tie at Darlington was going ahead. They were actually playing there. And Brian Wood was on the bench in charge of the side. Well, Tony Perry, the Workington chairman at the time, sensed that the Workington fans knew, that Colin Meldrum was coming in as new manager. He went down from the stand, from the director's box, down to the dugout, leant in and told Brian Wood they were appointing Colin Meldrum on Monday. Well, you can imagine that would go down like a lead balloon, and Brian was so, wrapped up in the game, had done so well that we all thought, in the way he had conducted himself, the way they got his team playing their football. And of course, he was a bit distraught by that. I remember that afterwards, Brian came back in the car with Roy Nicholson and myself, and we stopped off at Borough or Bowersmoor or somewhere, and he was telling us all about it, which is not the way it should have been done at all. Anyway, so that was poor old Brian, who stayed in the area for a while after that. I think he coached at Deer Orchard as well, and later went down to, I think it was Ipswich Way, where he managed a sports centre for a number of years. Lovely man, and it was very, very sad how his time at Workington Reds ended like that. So that was part of the problems at Workington. We didn't have managers who lasted very long. Colin Meldrum, of course, started really well, got manager of the month, and then things went downhill after that, and we were continually changing money. George Aitken came in, former centre half, great player, George, nice man as well, and he stopped the rot for a while, and then things just deteriorated as the quality of players that he was able to bring dropped down, and eventually in 1977 we lost our league status. Tony Perry was chairman. I remember going through to Carlisle, where we printed the paper on the Friday that the re-election meeting took place in London, Café Royal or something like that, where it was held. And the arrangement was that Tony Perry would ring me at Carlisle so that I could do my story for the paper, which came out on the Saturday morning. So they're sitting on in tenterhooks. Phone rang at the office we used at Carlisle. It was Tony Perry. I'll never forget his words. He says, "John, I'm sorry, we're out." That's all it was. That's all he said. And then he gave me the figures and such like. So Wimbledon took our place, and that was the end of Workington's 26 years in the Football League. 4 years we'd applied for re-election. So in basic terms, it was probably a deserved, if you like, rejection to give somebody else a chance. Teams, I know Carlisle United were very, very friendly with Altrincham at the time, and they were, I think, hoping that Altrincham would get in fact, it was Wimbledon, of course, who took our place, and they went from there to the First Division, of course. And Workington had started life in the NPL. Gordon Livesey, who just died last week, was the first player manager. Rather an odd appointment, first manager, a goalkeeper who'd never coached before. Had come from Kettering, where he was a legend in goal, and he didn't last long at Workington. And then, of course, there's been a succession of managers, and the first trophy, of course, the President's Cup, came under Joe Wojciechowicz, a good manager, knew the league, knew what players were needed to be successful, and we won the President's Cup. And hopefully, I'll be able to chat to John Rich, the captain of the time, who of the team at the time, who is coming over, I know, for the game this afternoon. So there'll be quite a few of that team here. One or two have not been able to come because I think John Smith's on holiday, Ian Johnston's on holiday. There's quite a few who are not with us because, or would be, because of their commitment. So, non-league. We've been in non-league for almost 50 years now. So twice as long as we're in the Football League, and we're down in the NPL Premier, which is three levels below the Football League. Can we get back? I would doubt it, but it would be too much of a even with a new stadium coming up. I think it might be too much for us. I always believe that National North is about where we were for a number of years under Darren Edmondson. I think that's our level. If we can just get sorted, and I'm hoping that Billy Barr, who's done such a wonderful job this season to keep us in the NPL Premier, he can get something together where we can have a squad next season, which I know we're going to be playing across the road at Derwent, Fibrous Community Stadium, but if he can put together a squad containing players of the quality that is already brought to the club, I'm sure we're going to be okay. I think that covers everything. The only thing I haven't mentioned there is the time that I was asked to caretaker manager of the club. I had been running the reserve team for a little while before that, so I knew the sort of the background to the setup. But it was my job as a reporter to ring up and get the news as best you could. And this particular time was that I'd heard that Mick Heaton had got sacked. So on the Monday morning, after the news had filtered out, I said to Colin Dobar, the chairman, I got the details to run the story. And at the end of the conversation, I said to him, well, we've got a game at Accrington tomorrow night, Colin. Who's going to be selecting the team? And Colin came out with those words, we rather hoped you would, John. So that's how I got into the caretaker's job. We went to Accrington on the Tuesday. A little bit poignant for me because that's where it all started from. My granddad was from Accrington. We didn't play at Peel Park. They were on another ground at the time. But granddad had been born 100 yards from Peel Park. We went, put a team together. I remember getting off the bus and Derek Fazakerley, who'd been signed by Mick Heaton, former Blackburn stalwart, record appearance holder, I think, later went on to be part of the England setup with Kevin Keegan. He met me and said, John, nothing personal, but Mick brought me to the club, and now that he's gone, that will be me finished. So that was the end. Derek said no, he wasn't going to play. Brian Gardner, who'd been another ex-league player with Preston and Blackpool, I think, he came along and said that he'd got a hamstring problem. But to his credit, he stayed and was a help in the dressing room as well for that match. We did well. Accrington were up the top. We were down the bottom. We did well enough. We lost 4-2. After the game, I said to Colin Dobar, Colin, you sorted for a manager? and he said, "Well, can you just hold the reins a wee bit longer?" And of course, my editor Terry Curtin wasn't too happy about this, and he thought it would be difficult to be able to interview yourself after a game, basically. But anyways, we went on. On the Saturday, we were at Harrogate away, and again, the lads did well enough, but lost 2-1. I remember after that game going in and to the dressing room, the lads went to the bar. I was in the dressing room with Colin, and my mate Kenny Wallace, a former player, was helping me, and he was on the other side of the table in the dressing room, and Colin had his back to me, back to him, and I was facing Colin, and we were talking about it. And Colin said during the conversation, he said, "What do we owe you, John, for this?" And I said, "Oh, no, I'm not wanting paid. It's all right." And Kenny was pulling his hair out on the other side of the table because he'd given shifts up at Sellafield to go to Accrington in midweek and to Harrogate on the Saturday. But anyways, no, he said, "We're nearly there, John. Can you just hold the reins a little bit longer?" That was on the Saturday. On the Tuesday or Wednesday, I forget now, we're at home again. We're at home for the first time at Borough Park, and it is Accrington Stanley in the return. Accrington went on to win the league, I'm sure, and we were down the bottom, and we lost 3-0. And I was able to. I was trying to bring in players. I was allowed to try and bring in players. Two lads from working that I'd actually taken to the reserves, Keith Hunton and Andy Walker. Tried to sign them. They'd gone to Newcastle Blue Star. And I was able to speak to Mick McCartney at Gretna and get Alan Carruthers, former Reds midfielder, good player. Got him on loan, and he played in that third game against Accrington Stanley. But we were awful. We got beat 3-0, and and as I got up off the dugout at Borough Park there, I thought I heard strains of "you're getting sacked in the morning," but went in, got the lads into the dressing room, out of the dressing room, into the bar, stood talking with Colin. "Colin, have you got somebody?" He said, "Yes, we have." And it was Les O'Neill, good man, and he got us pulled round and out of the danger zone. So that was my time there. So yeah, that's been it. We're still involved, working for the newspapers, for the Radio Cumbria, and for Crack, and it's been a lot of years and a lot of pleasure and a lot of enjoyment and mixed feelings this afternoon, I'm sure, about watching Reds on Borough Park for the last time.